Islam is a religion of peace.
Let's make two things clear. ISIL is not Islamic.
It's a common scene, world leaders showing deference to Islam in general out of fear of being labeled Islamophobic. Douglas Murray is the Associate Director at the Henry Jackson Society, and his book Islamophilia, released last year, highlights this love of Islam from leaders around the world. Murray joins us now from London. Douglas, thanks very much for joining us. And I first of all want to ask you, since you've written the book, ISIS has surged, and folks seem to be giving them a bit more attention than they have similar groups in the past few years. Does the narrative still hold today?
Yes, it does very much. Just in recent days, we've seen a repeat of exactly the phenomenon I talk about in the book. We've seen ISIS doing the most unbelievable actions, all of which they say they're doing in the name of Islam. And the reaction to their atrocities every single time from the West seems to be always the same. President Obama did it, John Kerry did it, David Cameron did it, everyone does it. Every time someone in Syria or Iraq chops off the head of somebody and says they're doing it in the name of Islam, the world's leaders from the West turn around and say it's got nothing to do with Islam. This isn't Islam. Islam is a religion of peace, didn't you know? David Cameron said, you know, this is nonsense. Islam is a religion of peace. World leaders of every political stripe, from left and right, from Republicans and Democrats in the States to Labour, Conservative in the UK and everywhere else, has been saying the same thing for 13 years now. And I submit that it's an attempt basically to not confront what is for all of us a very difficult truth, which is that groups like ISIS may very well have the worst possible interpretation of Islam for us, for Muslims and non-Muslims worldwide. It's obviously the most destructive form of Islam, but it is an interpretation of Islam. And to pretend otherwise is to carry out the most appalling cover-up.
Now, I frequently discuss in the columns I write and on television this Pew Forum survey from the other year, which shows that the majority of Muslims in some predominantly Muslim countries do have what we consider rather radical views towards Sharia law and so forth. Do you think that these politicians are see no evil, hear no evil about those sort of stats, or are they trying to draw a distinction between the folks over there and the Muslim adherents in their own country who are just working their jobs and going about their lives?
Exactly. I mean, I say in the book, and I've said many times in my life, that it isn't an easy one in many ways for politicians. They rightly want to make sure that the publics in the West in particular don't think that their Muslim neighbours are involved in this and so on. They want to make sure there's no backlash, which is always much heralded and actually never really happens. But, you know, the main problem they have here is that leaders who don't know anything about this religion are talking about it. I mean, I think that Christians, Jews, Hindus, Sikhs, anyone else would be outraged if leaders anywhere in the world started to talk about what their religion was or wasn't. It's not what democratic politicians in secular societies are used to doing. And the problem is that when they do try to do it, as they are at the moment with Islam, they can only give the most Panglossian gloss to the whole business. You know, it is a very mixed bag. It's a very difficult area. Islam is a complex religion. It has some good verses in it. It has some very bad things as well. But if politicians are going to start to tread into this area, they really should, I think, give the full facts.
It seems very bizarre, though, that they would always preface their comments with these, because, of course, if there's some sort of white supremacist group that the FBI is raiding, I mean, I don't think any white folks out there would expect some sort of preface that suggests, oh, no, you're not being marred by this. No other group expects this. Do you think that it's initially self-censorship on the part of the politicians? Do you think it comes from the communities themselves who are expecting these sort of disclaimers? What's the root of this?
Well, it's all sorts of things, and starting with, of course, a degree of fear from any figure who speaks out. Look, the Pope in 2006 spoke in the Regensburg Address, citing a Middle Ages Byzantine emperor, and he as a result of his very, very cautious speech, you know, there were churches burned across the world, there was a nun shot in Africa and so on. I mean, the Pope was able to be intimidated. Absolutely everybody is able to be intimidated, and I think it very much starts from from there. Part of it also, of course, is just an effort to be nice. And part of it is, and I go into this a bit in the book, and you can see it in Hollywood and the film industry and other parts as well. Part of it is a sort of self-flagellation. You know, people who, whenever you say anything about Christianity, immediately will leap into the Crusades and so on, the terrible things that have undoubtedly been done in Christianity's name throughout history, the terrible things that have been done in all religions' names throughout history. But then they come to Islam and the criticism stops. The criticism halts at the door of Islam, and I think that is enormously to be regretted. I think that door should be broken down. I think in free societies like Canada, like Britain and America, we should be able to say what we observe, and we should do so without fear, without favour, and with a considerable degree of honesty.
Now, there's a really interesting quote from your book that I want to put on the screen right now. You're not just saying that politicians on the left of the spectrum have these Islamophilia issues. Here's a statement, and I'll say who it's about when I finish it. He was forever hosting dinners for Muslim holy days and visiting mosques and going beyond what might be regarded as a constitutional duty not to go on about religion. He probably spoke more about Islam during his presidency than he ever dared to speak about his own much derided born-again Christian faith. You're writing about George W. Bush there. So you're saying, you know, he has that affliction too, even though a lot of folks who derided him said, oh, he's just an Islamophobic bigot or what have you. Tell me about how this seems to transcend politics.
Absolutely. It's extraordinary. I mean, a couple of days after 9/11, George Bush went to an Islamic center in Washington, talked about the Quran, talked about how good it was, talked about what a wonderful religion Islam was. Now, again, you know, you can understand it. He wants to make sure that there's no backlash against all Muslims, you know, in America or something. But if you just take a step back from this, I mean, this is a born-again Christian president who was very fearful about talking about his own faith for the derision that he would get, extolling Islam. I mean, if you went across the world and asked the world's Muslims who the most sort of so-called Islamophobic politician was, they'd probably come up with George Bush. If it weren't George Bush, it would be Tony Blair. Now, look, Tony Blair said a few years ago in an interview that he reads the Quran every single day. And when asked why, he said mainly for the wisdom that it imparts. You know, this is politicians, as I say, across the political spectrum. They talk in a way about Islam that they would not and do not talk about any other faith. And I think it's extraordinary, and it's extraordinary they're not derided by it. You know, there's a very powerful, very voluble atheist and secularist voice across the Western world now. I think part of it. What I can't understand is why secularists, atheists, as well as other believers and Muslims, don't ridicule this more. I mean, it's extraordinary. If any other faith were in the picture here, if any other faith were at issue, people would be making criticisms. Some of them would be very harsh. They would also not be saying, as a result of some Christian terrorist attack, that they read the Christian scriptures every day to get enlightenment from them and so on. It only happens with one faith, and I just think that that time should stop. I think that a period of complete criticism of all religion, where it's necessary, should be a part of our lives. It should be done, obviously, carefully. It should be done with a degree of respect at times. At times, it will also be ridicule. We've seen ridicule and satire of every other religion. Again, it all stops at the doors of Islam. I'd just like to see that era end.
Douglas Murray, we got to go. Thanks very much for these great words. And I agree, no sacred cows, leave no stone unturned. And whatever you criticize, folks, go online to learn more about Douglas Murray's book, Islamophilia.